Hello and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here with my friend and colleague Jim Gurley. And Jim and I spent a few minutes before we record talking back and forth about what we want to talk about. And I said on a previous podcast that we don't prepare. That's not what I meant. I mean we don't rehearse. So it's candid. It's from the gut. And what we came up with based on something Jim does every year with his alma mater, the football team that he played on in high school, and he's been doing it for 17 years, is tradition. And what he does, what Jim is doing, is certainly a tradition, but we kind of want to break that down. And I kind of thought it might be connected nicely to worldview on our wheel, from the self out, because I think many traditions are cultural, and culture is definitely part of what shapes one's worldview. So, Jim, maybe you go any way you want, but it might be cool if you could go back and say, this is what this is, and this is how it started. That'd be a great way to start, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Mark, thanks for the setting it up as this does fall of our five areas of life in the worldview area. And in the worldview, the subcategory is one of them is our childhood, right? Because we know that our childhood, along with our heritage and our um, um, religion or spirituality, is all connected of what happens later on in life. So yeah, this is my former high school. So I realized after you know life after that, the impact that this football program had on my life, and had it not been for this football program, there is no question in my life it would have been very different. And when we were talking, we had mentioned gangs, right? So yeah, the reality is the area at the time, it was, it's a very middle class area. It's changed like all parts of the country, but there was two pathways, and it was either you're going to do sports or you're going to go the other direction, which is typically involved in gangs or some kind of criminal activity. That was just pretty much through the pathways, and I believe that happens at that stage in your life, right around the ninth grade or 10th grade.
Mm-hmm.
I had two cousins. Both of them went to prison. I could have easily followed their footsteps. We were about the same age.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I got involved in this, and kind of the rest is history. So the origin story goes, after playing rugby, I'd moved my business to back to Hayward. So I had my business there. And one of my good friends asked if I'd get involved with the coaching, as he was a high school coach at that school. And I realized, man, this really not much different than it was when I was there. It's just that the place hadn't been touched. There was lack of resources, and that the school was built in the 50s. So I reached out to, at the time, a very good friend of mine. One was the manager at the Seattle Mariners. The other one was a NFL head coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I said, "Hey, what do you guys think about getting together and raising some money to redo their weight room?" And we did. It was very successful. And then it evolved into something bigger than that. And it was inspired by this book that I read, and then happened that Jack was actually reading the same book and was having his NFL players read to him. It was called The Season of Life. And the short version of it is, it's a number one bestseller at one time, but it's this NFL football player that later on, I think he became a pastor, but realized that what's wrong with the world is that we're not building young men into men, and in the whole book talked about the importance of building men for others. And one of the best parts of his book, he talks about first day of practice, and one of the parents walked up. They were getting ready for a scrimmage or a game, and the parent asked the coach, "Hey, what's the team look like this year?" And he paused. He looked at the players warming up, and he said, "I'll tell you in 15 years."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
because it was building teams for other, right? It was has nothing to do with football, nothing at all to do with football.
Yeah.
We use football as the net that you throw over them, and building men's for others is he saw what was going on what was bad in the world, and that that if you don't get a young man in the right place, and then that only turns into bigger problems later on. So that's kind of the gist of it. And then that's led to a mentorship, that's led to a nonprofit. We've done a lot of different things, but let's get into what you were talking about. And I think the four areas that you had picked up on this was tradition, continuity, belonging, and then creating an environment. And that speaks to this. I guess what we're going to talk about today, right?
Yeah, it's there's a number of ways to go with this, but I think if we keep it around your particular mission here, I mean, it was just this past weekend, as I understand it, that you had
Mhm.
your annual picnic where 28 of the kids, was it seniors only or varsity only? Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this is number 17. What's kind of cool about this year and last year too was the first time that we started to do this 17 years ago. It's in our backyard, so they show up. We cook them. Uh, 150 pieces of chicken, so they get to eat all they want, and they put their tents out. I have a large piece of grass area in the back, far back of my home, and the whole you know evening and the next day is all theirs. So but I lost my train of thought.
No, no,
uh,
no. That's just
yeah,
the structure of, that
yeah,
that event is what triggered the conversation.
yeah. Oh
And
yeah,
then,
I forgot to say. So what's kind of special about this now is that first one that we did, um, three or more than that. There's like five of those of the very first one we did now are part of the football program. In fact, one is the head coach,
Mhm.
one is the PE teacher, and the other one is a counselor of some kind. And one's the head coach, um, and all three of them have their master's degrees.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show you about the tradition that they came back, among others. By the way, I think there's like eight alumni on the coaching staff.
Hmm.
And then I also have a youth program that I combined a few years ago. So that's about 200 youth kids in addition to the three levels of the football, which has now become all part of the same program right there, all at the school.
Hmm.
And so yeah, a lot of tradition. And I remember when I was there, the tradition is what made you want to be part of the program, right? You
Yeah.
really like, especially at that age of 15 years old, and the impact that had on my life was just yeah, it was life changing. And so that's really the mission. The mission is to create an environment to support not just the players, but the parents, the coaches, and even the teachers, the principal. I've worked with the superintendent to help get a $240 million bond measure passed to redo the fields, not just for Hayward High, but for the other two high schools in the city.
Hmm.
And yeah, we've really had a huge impact by getting involved in this
You know,
tradition. Yeah.
the ripple effect, that there's so many rich topics just in what you just said.
Hmm.
I think that one of the things that I am saddened by is, I think generally speaking in our country, we're moving away from traditions.
Hmm.
And I think this tradition of yours is a perfect example of why we shouldn't be doing that. We should be encouraging tradition. We
Hmm.
should be encouraging celebration. We should be encouraging the development of men, and not be threatened by a real man who is supplies for his family and takes care and
Hmm.
protects and that. Um, Football, I wasn't a football player. My father wouldn't let me play football. He said, "You can play in college." I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." And but I know a lot of football players, and I know a lot of hockey players, and there's something about those two sports where there's a toughness. There's a different level of expectation. I played basketball, and even though you bang around, it's different.
Hmm.
It's not the same. It's like there's something about toughness that is that this tradition supports.
Hmm.
And I'm not talking about hostility. I'm
Hmm.
not talking about harming others or imposing your force or your will on other people. And I think that's what the left side of our country is doing, is they're associating masculinity with toxicity. And I think what I would assume that you and these coaches and all of the surrounding influences, all of the other authorities that are in this culture and in this tradition, are developing men that can take care of themselves and can take care of others,
Mhm.
and there's something about football that just supports that message.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot to it. Like you said, not only is it it's not the football, it's also think about the high school experience, right? Because of the time of the year, they've been practicing all summer. Um, the first day of school is around the same time, and it kicks off the whole entire season, or not the season, but the school year. And everybody benefits from that, right? The community of the school, people, it's excited to be the spirit of the school. So
Hmm.
even though, like you said, there's the football team, it's the time of the year, but it's also how it brings everybody together in the very beginning of the school year, and that's good for everybody, right? That's good for the
Yep.
principal, that's good for the teachers, that's good for the freshmen, the seniors, everybody, and that consistency and continuity is super important to have a healthy childhood experience that
Yeah.
that that
Yeah.
that continues on. So
Well, I think and the area of the state, I would say I would refer to this particular high school would be the kids that are going there are not uh, are not dealing with abundant resources, and they're not many of them aren't dealing with two parents in the home. And
yes,
so and
yes,
so all the more important, because I've heard Denzel Washington talk about this all the time, because he talks about, and I think it was around 12 or 13, he said, his father took him and said, no, you're not going over there. Those
yeah,
kids are making bad choices. You're coming over here. And then
yeah,
he would talk about, we always talk about how we have all these problems with people. It's like that stuff happens when you're like in seventh grade, you know?
yeah,
And I remember hanging around, you hang around with a group of guys, mostly when you're real young because of close proximity, right? They're in your
yeah,
neighborhood, or you go to the
yeah,
same school, or your parents are friends or whatever. There's something that's totally random about that
yeah,
initial engagement. And then when you get to, I don't know, it's probably 10 to 12, maybe a little bit later than that, depending. Some kids are precocious and some are a little slow. But cigarettes come into play, alcohol comes into play, girls come into play,
oh yeah,
and people make good choices and people make bad choices, and the people that make good choices are typically associated with some particular authority figure that
hmm,
they know, love, and trust, that trusts, knows, and loves them as well, and guides them and mentors them. And in the absence of a parent, particularly a male parent for boys, those kids that are in that situation, and there are many millions of them in this country, um, if they don't have an uncle, or they don't have a big brother, the other choices aren't good. They're
yeah.
criminal choices.
Yeah, Mark,
And
I want to
so
speak to that because you
please
touched on
do.
some really important points that remind me. And one of the was that yeah, the kind of an epiphany I had over my experience. Remember, I grew up there, but I wasn't living there, and I started this about the same time that my son and my daughter were in high school, or daughter was a little bit younger. So I did have this very interesting perspective of every day driving from an area that I live, which is the 1%, to the 99%, right?
Hmm.
And the contrast, the whiplash of that. So it was one thing to drive there because that's where my I'd purchased a commercial building, so that's where my business was at the time. And of course, my mom still lived there, so that wasn't that new to me. But when you started to go into the school and you started to see the conditions, the difference between um, not just the resources at the school, but the surrounding, the supporting roles, right, of everybody. Where my kids were going to school, had a sandwich, a ride to school, and they got picked up. Right, the parking lot is full of cars. Right, you drive to the other school, there's two cars in the parking lot because nobody has a car.
Hmm.
So there's these just extreme differences, and I just remember saying that that's just life. Part of it is, but one of my I really took on the challenge. Hey, I was given this gift to learn how to compete, right? Because I later on found out that they were professional athletes, but it wasn't just the professional athletes that were I was on the team. I was the guys that I actually started the alumni group with. One of my still very very good friends was an attorney. So
Hmm.
he was the one that helped do the nonprofit. The other one was running one of the largest construction company. He was like an owner, executive VP. So it wasn't just the athletic part of it. It was all these other guys that also benefited from the gift that we were given to compete, to learn how to compete. And that's the greatest gift you can give a young man, is the
Hmm.
ability to compete and not to depend on other people. And
Hmm.
even though we're very, very diverse, even then, as far as, different flavors of nationalities and all these different races, we all got along really well. And that's what I love about business and sports, is that it really is, you're not discriminated against at all. If you can produce results, everybody comes together, and you have this unity, you have this camaraderie, and it applies to everything in life. And so that was really my goal, was to make sure that tradition continued on. And as a result, here we are 17 later, and you realize the impact that it can have. But
Well,
yeah,
you're doing,
it is like you said, Mark, the secondary role. I've talked about this before. The reality is, um, in these areas, and not just in the San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland area, this is throughout our country. We have over a 50% divorce rate, and there's just not fathers in the home, right? Now that sounds really bad, and I wish we could change that. I was fortunate to have that. You did too, but I also realized that, when a young man is about 14, 15 years old, you can't have two men in one home. I really believe that secondary role model, which could be a grandfather, an uncle, a neighbor in my case, or a football coach, really can have a huge impact on him. So we can't change the fact that not everybody has an intact home, or let's just say intact. That's bad choice of words, but traditional mom and dad in each home, and many of them do. So it's not like they all don't, but it doesn't mean that kid uh, can't get that from a coach or somebody else. I'm sorry to say this, but it has to be another male figure,
mhm.
right? It really does, and that's the importance. And to your point, not to go political, but we have created this, particularly in California. This the focus has been so much on women or young girls, which has been great. You have a daughter, I have a daughter, but we've forgotten about these young men, and almost stripping their masculinity from them, um, leads them to really not good things, right? That's a very natural thing for the majority of these young men. And so to have a combat sport where they can take that energy and that anger and funnel it into something is very good for them. And
Oh
it's,
yeah, you say it all the time. You tell me how many fights you got into when you were young, and
oh,
if you didn't
absolutely.
have that channel
Oh
of
my God.
football to take out your frustrations or your anger,
Uh,
which is actually a perfect place, probably no better place maybe than a boxing ring,
yeah,
and where else are you going to channel that energy? So
yeah,
I think based on what you've told me about how, when, and where you've grown up and the circumstances, I think it was a very thin line between you spending the rest of your life in prison and being as successful as you are right now. And look at what you're giving back. I mean, I'm not kissing your ass. It's just like
well,
the ripple effect of this stuff is incredible, you
yeah.
know?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And again, I did it just because it was my way of assuring that other young men would have that same opportunity. But without that tradition that you mentioned in the very beginning,
Hmm.
and without that continuity and the belonging, and then create that environment, that's not easy to do. That there takes a lot to do that, and from all different angles. Whether it's the relationship I had with the superintendent, to the Unified School District board president, to the principal, the athletic director, all those have to be in alignment in order to get that kind of support. So it's what I do now is not much on the field at all. I do some mentoring and have these events, but it's really the supporting kind of from the background. Nobody sees it, because I think that's where you can have the most impact. And those coaches, I mean, they don't get paid a lot, and a lot of them volunteer their time. Yeah.
Hmm.
So without them contributing their time and their passion, we don't have that. And the fact that most of them had played on the high school team, we all have that in common. It's the belonging. And
Yeah.
in fact, that's the message, and I'll share that with you. The message. I do have a short talk with them right before dinner when they all get there. This year we had 28, And then the next morning, I share a message with them, and I'll, if you'd like, I'll share that with you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great. I would appreciate that. No, I think that back to the masculinity thing, I think there are a lot of things that are we're pushing back against human nature. And I think this and you can't it's like trying to tell God what to do. You know, it's
Mhm.
like if you're 90, 99% of the male population, I would say, have a built-in clock. It's a survival clock. It's a protection clock. It's a support clock. You know, it's a go get the kill the animals and get the food clock. You know, it's make the money clock. I mean, these are not bad things. All of them could be abused, and
Mhm.
most anything can be abused. But I think what you're also doing with these kids is you're not going against that clock. You're actually taking that clock saying, okay, how can we tune this up, make this a high performance man? Right.
Yeah.
And so that he can then have the impact, maybe such as you've had after coming through this, you give back. If everybody was able to go out and produce and come back and give back, we might be able to chip away at this imbalance that we have
Yeah.
now. But the reverse is being done too to the women. My two girls, and I say it without any apology, and they're both in trusting and loving relationships now. But for a long time, they were very confused just because of this. Like, what is a man? What is a woman? What are we talking about? You
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah. But like you said, let's go with some numbers. Just starting off, just to give you an idea that originally everybody wants, and it was success was defined as getting kids in college, right? The fact of the matter is that's not realistic, right? And here when I started this, here are the numbers, and these are published numbers. I didn't make these up, but in this area, this particular area of the San Francisco Bay Area, the East Bay, um, there was close to at one point it was a 28% uh, dropout rate. Basically, if you started in the ninth grade, you didn't finish and graduate in the 12th grade. So think about that, Mark, that
mhm.
statistic. Right?
That's horrible.
Oh, as an American, we should be embarrassed at that. But and that it's gone down a little bit. But that because if a kid doesn't graduate from high school, the reality is his incarceration rate goes through the roof.
Hmm.
He's going to have children that he can't support.
Hmm.
All the ripple effects of that are just devastating to another generation, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So you talk about a breakdown of our educational system, and they did that year after year after year after year. So it's come down a little bit, but that's pretty sad that in at this day and age that we still have close to a 25, 28% dropout rate.
Yeah.
But one thing I do know that if the kid is participating in a sport, it could be women's sports, it could be any sport, their likelihood of graduating also goes up to 80, 90%, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So originally it was, hey, let's get every kid in college. But no, to me, it's really about, hey, let's get the kid a college education, a high school education, so he has the choice to go and do some things after, and he's prepared. So the message has always been, I'm going to prepare you for the last whistle, and that whistle blows typically sometime in October, November if you're in a playoff game. Um, and then I'm going to prepare you for the last bell, and that bell's going to ring in June, and
Hmm.
your life's going to change. And you've heard me say this before. I'm speaking to the seniors at this point, right? Um, the educational system really is preparing them from socialism. And then we release them into capitalism when that bell rings and expect why they can't survive.
Yeah.
And that's really what goes on year after year. So I know I'm going negative on the educational system, and it's certainly not the people at this school. They're fantastic, right? What they do, but at the high level, that's really what we're doing.
Well,
Is we're
I
not we're
think
not
it's
preparing them for life and
no, I mean, and
capitalism. Yeah.
you know what my opinion is on this. I mean, with what I've done for a living my whole life is helping people find work.
Mm-hmm.
And when my children graduated, when they had their last bell, I was left with helping them prepare.
Mm-hmm.
Most kids don't have someone like me. Most kids
Mm-hmm.
don't have
That's
a
right.
dad that has spent his life helping people find work.
That's right.
So and when I coached them, I told you this, and they said, Dad, you're telling us stuff we've never heard before. No one else is teaching this stuff. And it's
That's
like,
right.
and it's, Mike Rowe, the guy, the dirty,
Yeah,
dirty jobs guy. He
he's
does, he does a lot of work in this area. He's scholarship wise, and he pushes the trades.
yeah,
So, but there's nothing dishonorable about the trades,
right.
and you get a high school degree and you don't have the opportunity to go to college because of resources or
Hmm.
ability or whatever. You can jump right into a trade, work your
That's
ass
right.
off for 5 years
Yeah,
as an apprentice, and then start your
yeah,
own company. You
yeah.
know.
And there's some good stuff. There's some changes going on in that area.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's so that like you said, the last whistle, and that's when they're a senior. As soon as that last whistle blows, they're off the team.
Yeah.
They're no longer part of the program.
Yeah.
And I just remember that feeling that basketball season started at that very moment.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
everything shifts to basketball, right? You were
Yep.
one of those guys. You got all
Yep.
the attention at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when that bell rings, it's the last bell where and you're now you're released into capitalism. You've got to go out there and swim.
Well,
And
there's another component to this that came up in another conversation we had. I think it was part of the other podcast. Is we were talking about our respective athletic careers, and you have always talked about the winning attitude, and I shared with you, I think for the first time, that we had a losing attitude.
mhm,
My baseball team and my basketball team, I was one of the best players on both teams, but we lost a lot. I
mhm,
never had a winning record in high school,
mhm,
and we had bad coaches.
mhm.
So I think the other component of what you're doing here is you're teaching people that you should have every expectation that you should be able to compete with anyone. And
Yeah,
that if you do everything
yeah,
right and you show up every day, there's a good possibility you can win everything. Maybe
yeah.
once, maybe twice. And that infects the
That's yeah,
culture. It infects the environment and it's contagious either
yeah.
way.
Yeah, good stuff, Mark. You get me all excited, but no, you're so right on about that. And again, I just valued that gift. I remember when I was a sophomore, I played 3 years of varsity, right? So they brought me up, and I think it was like fourth string or something, and I ended up working my way to the starting position towards the end of the season. But I remember Jack coming in the locker room one time, and again, I'm 15 years old, right? So and he's massive, right? He's like 6'5", 240 pounds, and they had just won the NCS championship, so they won the whole thing the year before. So but he comes in he comes in the locker room, and he says, nobody runs on Hayward. And I didn't really understand what he was saying, because I was just a stupid kid, right? Just trying to figure it all out. But boy, did that stay with me, right?
Yeah.
That mentality, that and it's true. We ended up having, I think, the best defense ever in the league. We had 99 yards rushing in seven, and we won the league championship. We had 99 yards total rushing in a regular season
Rushing
uh,
yards against you.
against us. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We lost in the playoff, obviously by the pass.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, and this is a bit of a tangent, but it is tradition, is I'm surrounded by military tradition. My
Yeah,
father was a fighter pilot and my brother was a fighter pilot. You
yeah,
talk about a winning tradition. You talk about a competition. Like
yeah,
neither one of these guys wanted to be a pilot. They
yeah,
wanted to be a fighter pilot,
yeah,
and both of them were at the top of their class from a school standpoint and from a performance standpoint, whether it was gunning or routines or whatever. Neither one of them saw combat, although my brother did fly out of Turkey over Iraq a few years back when they called up the National Guard. But you get it. I was able to go into the bar after these guys came out of the sky
wow,
training and sit in the middle and have beers with them.
yeah,
I would imagine it's not dissimilar from a high performance football team or
yeah.
a group of Navy SEALs or whatever. I mean,
Oh yeah,
I'm not
that's next
giving
level stuff. Yeah,
I'm not giving athletes the same credit as I would military guys, but it's analogous. It's just
yeah,
it's like if you're infused with the how to compete and you're infused with an expectation of winning at a young age, I mean, you're so far ahead of the game. And what you're doing with these kids in your backyard once a year, and then peppering it with other events and other golf tournaments and other,
Yeah.
just FaceTime with these kids, giving them speeches, mentoring them, giving them advice, having a cup of coffee with them. And it's so powerful. I just think that,
Yeah. Well,
generally speaking, I really think we should be pushing tradition, reinforcing tradition, and not trying to get traditions to go away.
yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you mentioning that. But yeah, it was a mentality that, again, I carried on into business. I carried that on into, obviously, my rugby had a huge impact on that, going
Mm-hmm.
from third division to win the national championship in second division and just keep going up. It was that Hayward mentality
Yeah.
that that
Yeah.
that I always use. So that's really what's inspired me to do all this. But yeah, I'll share with you the message. I've refined it over the years, but I have a little talk with him right before dinner, and that message is pretty simple. And then I'll do one the next morning. I share that with you as well. But that message is simple. Hey, um, welcome to our home. Want to congratulate you. You did something to get here, and it's not easy. And that's what you did was you showed up. And 90% of life is showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow, some way, you've showed up enough to make it on the varsity football team at Hayward High, and that's why you're a guest in my home for the next couple of days, because you've earned it, right? And it's easy. It's hard to show up all the time. So that's the message. And there's only one rule. And again, 17 times, right? There's one rule. And of course, the players that were there last year and the year before, they know what the one rule is. And that one rule is no rules. And the reason I do that every year is because I'm reminding them that there's no rules. This is private property. This is close to 2 acres. It's all yours. You can eat as much as you want. You can do whatever you want. The coaches are going to leave, and they'll go home. You'll be here. I'll be upstairs sleeping. And no rules. And by the way, we haven't had a single incident in 17 years. And I don't
Yeah.
expect that to change today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a great
Yeah.
message. That's
And
such an empowering message, you know.
yeah, it is really powerful because that's all I have to say. I don't go say, don't do this and don't do that. And I may say something like, and I don't expect that to change
Yeah.
today. And,
Yeah.
and it hasn't. 17 years.
Well, you're
Not,
also
not a single incident.
yeah, from my perspective, I'm also hearing that you're also saying I trust you, you
That's
know.
exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
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 I'm saying
Yeah.
I trust you in my home as a guest.
And I'm sure many of these kids, many of any kids, don't feel that the adults trust them, you know. And so
Yeah.
that's quite a compliment that you're paying to them, and what
Yeah.
they're giving you back is respect, you know.
It is. And it's also, you have to hand it to the seniors or the juniors that had been there the year before, right? They're making sure that they keep the other guys in line as well. And
Yeah, nobody wants to do anything that will make number
nobody,
18 not occur.
they don't. Yeah.
Yeah,
So um,
that's cool,
yeah.
dude.
So
That's
that's it.
cool.
So then the next morning I'll do, and I'll share it with you because I've kind of narrowed it down, but I always remind them 90% of life is showing up, and it's hard to show up. It's hard to show up, but if you show up um, all the time, you show up on time, and you showed up prepared with a good attitude, anything's possible in this country.
Yeah.
But you got to
Yeah.
show up, and you
Yeah.
got to work. You got to work. You got to work hard. But so that's the number one message. Show up. It's not easy to show up. There's a
Well,
lot of
yeah, it is, and I had shining examples of that too. My dad was I don't remember him ever missing work for any reason ever
yeah,
for 35 years. So that kind of modeling is again, it's so powerful. And in the absence of that, I think what you have is you have confused young men, and there's nothing worse than confused young men, you
mm-hmm.
know. And the other thing, my parents told all of us, you don't have to play a sport, you don't have to play an instrument, you don't have to get a job, but you got to pick one,
That's
right?
right.
You got to pick one because you're not going to have idle time after school,
Right.
you know. And those are
Yeah,
all traditions, those are
yeah,
all some of the traditions I was involved in. And
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And the second
it's
one that I'll share with them. This again, I try to keep it around five or six. But so the second one was don't wish it was easier. Wish you were better.
yeah, yeah.
It's
I
and it's
just read
one
an
that I think we all. These are conversations that you're going to have, and that conversations with yourself. And
Mhm,
I said these are things I want you to think about, but also use them. I use them. I still use them today. But don't wish it was easier. Wish you were better. And what that speaks to is um, boys blame others. Men take responsibility. Be a
mhm,
man. And that's the be a man, as we're preparing you for life. We're preparing you to go on and be your best version of yourself in life. We're going to use this game of football. It's going to give you a roadmap of exactly what to do, what not to do. And part of this is just showing up all the time and just making mistakes and getting better, buying into something bigger than you, knowing that you can't go it alone. And but don't blame it your problems on others, and
mhm.
and don't wish it was easier. Wish you were better. So the second
Yeah.
one is be so good they can't ignore you. I said that's you want to shut somebody up, just just be so good that they can't ignore you.
Mhm.
That's the best way. I said. Well, also growing up in Hayward, it was whether it was rugby or football, you were always kind of looked down. It is it is referred to. Let's just say if you talk to somebody from the peninsula or San Francisco or even the South Bay, the East Bay is like the um, armpit of the Bay Area. That's what's referred to.
The island of misfit toys.
Yeah, it goes back to kind of the Raider days, right? The Raider that mentality. It's
Oh yeah.
so
Oh
so.
yeah.
But yeah, it's be so good they can't ignore you, because when you're really good at something, uh, they won't ignore you. You know
Mhm,
that's let your actions speak for you, not your words.
mhm,
Um, and then again, it's not what happens to you in life; it's how you respond to what happens to you. Just letting them know everybody has problems, and you're going to have problems, and bad things are going to happen. But it's not what happens to you; it's how you respond to what happens to you,
mhm,
and get comfortable with that, because how you react is going to change your your the difference between a successful outcome or an unsuccessful outcome.
mhm.
And yeah, and again, I just reinforcing that. And throughout the year, I'll ask them about that. We'll have some senior dinners and we'll go deep dives into that. But it really is programming their minds that to use this season to also be the best version of themselves,
Mhm.
and work hard, show up, buy into the coaches, and and hopefully have a successful season. And if they win, that's great. Obviously, winning helps, but it's not just about the winning. It's about preparing you, taking all these lessons that you can apply to life for the rest of your life. And that's so yeah, it's worked out well. I mean, it's like anything, it's a lot of work, but the giver gets more than the receiver sometimes too. So
Oh, I bet that feels wonderful. Yeah, I bet you just would step back and just when everyone starts eating, all these young men sitting around a table trying to aspiring to greatness and
yeah.
thinking about all the thoughts you put in their head, and you just kind of look around and you must just look around and smile, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Because especially because they're like, especially the coaches, they're like our sons, right? We've been to their graduations, we've been to their weddings. We grew up with them, so that's nice too. Because this is the second generation of this.
Even the kids that don't have those gaps, those socioeconomic gaps, I don't know how many of them do or don't, but any young man's going to benefit from that experience.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not, you're filling tremendous gaps for a lot of them, I'm sure, but even the ones with the fewer gaps are, I
yeah,
mean, what a fantastic modeling process for a young man.
yeah.
And we're pushing it away. We're in our
Well, they
society.
are trying to remove these programs from a lot of schools. There's
Yeah.
no question. Yeah. Here's something that's interesting, Mark. I'll share this with you, and I share it with the players later on in the season. Do you know, over the years, what my observation has been, that the kids that do the best in life later on are actually not the best players.
Right.
It it's the one you don't. It's the second string guy that keeps showing up
Mm-hmm.
and maybe gets a couple reps, but he buys in another level. It's it it's that guy, that kid that goes on and does really good in life. So it's
Yeah.
you. I always
Yeah.
find that interesting. It's you just never know who's listening or who you're going to have an impact on, right? It's not the focus is always on the star players, but that's in some ways that's a curse, right? Because they expect that in the rest of their life. It's the marginal players that actually benefit the most in some ways. It's kind of crazy, huh?
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. I think there's a couple of things that I've makes me think of. I think that the more talented you are,
Mm-hmm.
the less likely it is that you're going to work as hard as the less talented guy. You don't need to sometimes, and particularly in high school. I think when you get to college, that ratchets up the competition. And of course, going pro, you're playing with the best of the best. All
Mm-hmm.
those guys have to work, but you can get away with stuff if you're a really talented athlete and still perform at a high level, and you can mask that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
yeah,
if you're not the best guy on the team, if you're looking, for basketball, for instance, you're the sixth guy, you know, um, you got to work your ass off. You got to get rebounds. You got to play defense. You can't just shoot all the time.
yeah,
And so, yeah,
yeah,
that doesn't surprise me. It's an
yeah.
interesting observation, though.
It is, yeah. Before we wrap up, you mentioned something about the alternative, right? Which is gangs or other, let's just say,
Cro-
alternatives besides sports. And I wrote down a couple of things. I want you to just kind of expand on it. But it was belonging, routine, um, structure, um, and a hierarchy, uh, and honor. So you were tying those, and I think it's a really important conversation of if they don't get it through an organized, productive, like say a football program or another sport, these young men will go seek that out somewhere else. And
Absolutely.
and if you think about what prison is, and again, I have cousins that have been in prison, so I have a firsthand, um, let's say, insight on the structure of what prison is. Very structured. There's a
Hmm.
hierarchy. There's an honor. They will go seek it somewhere else and get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
and,
I mean,
and,
I've
and
never been in a gang. I don't know anybody that's in a gang personally. But I know that gangs have all of those things. Gangs give you a sense of belonging. They have structure. They have rules.
yeah.
They have a hierarchy. They have
Mhm.
all of the sense of community. They have
Mhm.
all of those things. Us against them.
Mhm.
It's yeah. I think what again, just to kind of summarize it, if anybody who's listening has the bandwidth and the inclination, a man specifically, I'm talking about. If you have the opportunity to do anything like Jim's doing, um, I would highly encourage you to seek out what that looks like, because the impact of that, I can't think of too many things better than that to bring into our society right now, is helping the effort of turning young men into men.
Mhm.
And I think it's a noble cause, and I think we should spend more time talking about it and more time working around it.
Yeah, there are some guys. We talk about Scott Galloway, right? And
Mhm.
he's talking about it, I think, in a big way. The depression of young men, kind of the gaming generation, even the COVID generation. These young men are really struggling, and that's not good for anybody. That's not good for anybody.
It's not, but if we could encourage them to belong to something admirable, to
That's right.
belong to participate in some traditions,
Hmm.
I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can, just where I live right now. You can associate yourself with a church, with the library programs. You can associate
Yeah.
yourself with the community center and the boys clubs, and the list goes on. There are numerous places, and there's plenty of kids in my neighborhood that don't have two parents in their home. My kids, to your point, the divorce rate, my children who grew up in a pretty upscale place, the half of their friends didn't have two parents in the home.
Hmm. Yeah.
So this is a problem that's not going to get any better. So we have to
Yeah.
come at it, I think, from
Yeah.
a different angle.
Yeah.
And what you're doing,
If somebody was to ask about, and I appreciate you mentioned that, how could somebody help out? My recommendation would be, um, consistency is everything. And so right away, it's going to be hard to have a direct impact, right? Because they only trust you when they see you and they know who you are, right? That this trust is built up right from the beginning of this football season, right? That they know who I am and that builds on. But that can happen over time as you get more involved. But really, what helps the most, help the coaches out. The coaches really need the support. Just thanking them, kind of like
Hmm.
I always try to, like, I bought coffee a couple days ago and there was three police officers behind me. I bought their coffee, right? Just to show that you appreciate what they do. Same with military guys or anybody. So just thanking a coach
Hmm.
and then say, hey, but buying them some food, bringing them a meal, a team meal, cooking something. You don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to just show up and give and do something like that. That helps
Hmm.
them out a lot. That's
Yep. Yep.
and then eventually, if you want to get more involved, you do that every year. You come back in consistency. Don't expect to have a direct impact. And don't expect for these kids to respond to you right away. They're just not going to, right? They don't know who
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah. No,
And
I know that firsthand. I spent, I think it was 3 years, and the director left, which is when I left. I didn't get along with the new director, but the
Mhm,
homeless shelter downtown, I'd
mhm.
go every Saturday and I'd bring my kids whenever I could, and we'd take the kids over to the field, and
Yeah,
maybe from 6 or 7 years old to about 16, I suppose. And they're living in a homeless shelter, some of them with their parents, some of them on their own.
yeah.
And we'd play flag football for,
Mhm.
an hour, and then I'd buy like 10 pizzas and we'd sit around, and
Yep.
they were looking at me skeptically,
Oh yeah, they
probably
will.
for a couple of Saturdays. Like,
Yeah,
who is this guy?
yeah. Especially if I referred, if you don't have the same color hair, skin, um, age.
No, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was
Yeah,
I'm also big, so it's easy to see me.
yeah, yeah.
But I tell you what, dude, once you crack them open,
Oh yeah,
once they trust you, it's a game changer.
yeah, yeah. Well, again, and you get as much as they get out of it. So
More. I got more out of it. Yeah.
you do, and I think that was one of the other things I realized early on to this. I would never. I really pulled back on some of the public events, especially at that time because, yeah, especially when Jack became the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. He's such a figure, right? That it draws a lot of energy, which is good, but also a lot of hype. And he was great about that. He was always very cautious about the wrong kind of energy that can draw.
Hmm.
So yeah, over the years, I really made a decision to kind of go off the radar and not make a big deal about it because I almost feel like some people do this to exploit them
Yep.
um,
Yep.
in all the wrong
Look at
ways.
it. Yeah. Look at how good I am. Yeah.
That's right. That
Yeah.
sometimes those are the worst. Those are the worst people because they're really
Yeah.
not doing it because they care about the cause. They're
No,
doing it because they want other people to see them do that.
this
And I,
this what you're doing cannot be accomplished without authenticity. There's no
yeah,
question.
yeah.
There's no
So
question.
I found that over time, less publicity and people that really care will come and try to help out. And that's why I was so invested in trying to bring back players that grew up like I did in that area that really understand the dynamics, they understand it is a cultural thing, it is a worldview.
Hmm.
They can relate and have an impact greater than somebody from the outside coming in. It's
Yeah, no question.
yeah,
No, that's
so
good stuff, Jim. I
yeah,
appreciate you sharing those
yeah.
stories. That's hopefully we've encouraged maybe at least a couple of men to go out there and look into what this might look like for them.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Until next
Thanks,
week.
Jim. Yeah, man.